In the autumn of 1847, when workmen began excavating the foundation for a new church on the former Stanwood estate in rural Millbrook, Connecticut, their shovels struck something that would haunt the community for generations. Beneath 3 feet of carefully packed earth, they uncovered the first of what would eventually total 37 unmarked graves, each containing human remains that bore unmistakable signs of deliberate mutilation and experimentation. The discovery sent shockwaves through the quiet farming community, but it was what investigators found in the basement of the abandoned Stanwood mansion that truly revealed the scope of the horror. Hidden behind a false wall, sealed with bricks and mortar, lay a leather-bound ledger that documented 18 years of systematic murder disguised as medical treatment. The meticulous handwriting of Dr. Cornelius Stanwood filled page after page with clinical observations about human suffering, detailed anatomical studies conducted on living subjects, and careful financial records showing payments received from wealthy families desperate to hide their troubled relatives from society. Between 1829 and 1847, over 60 people had been delivered to the Stanwood Private Sanitarium for Nervous Disorders, a facility that promised discreet treatment for the mentally afflicted children of Connecticut's elite families. Of those 60 souls who passed through the ornate iron gates of the Stanwood estate, only 23 ever emerged alive. The rest became unwilling participants in Dr. Stanwood's grotesque experiments, their screams muffled by the thick stone walls of the mansion's converted basement laboratory. Before we descend deeper into this tale of familial evil that Connecticut authorities tried desperately to suppress, this story isn't for everyone. Only those brave enough to confront the darkest chapters of American medical history should continue. If you're ready to join our community of truth seekers who refuse to let these victims be forgotten, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what state you're listening from tonight. Together, we'll ensure that the horrors inflicted by the Stanwood family are never buried again. The Stanwood family had arrived in Millbrook in 1823, purchasing a sprawling estate that included a 3-story Georgian mansion, extensive grounds, and enough isolation to conduct their business without unwanted scrutiny. Dr. Cornelius Stanwood presented himself as a progressive physician specializing in the humane treatment of mental afflictions, a field still shrouded in superstition and brutality in early 19th century America. His credentials appeared impeccable, a medical degree from Harvard, advanced studies in Europe, and glowing recommendations from prominent Boston physicians. What the community didn't know was that Cornelius Stanwood had been quietly dismissed from his position at Massachusetts General Hospital following allegations of conducting unauthorized experiments on charity patients. The charges had been hushed up to protect the hospital's reputation, and Stanwood had been allowed to relocate rather than face public disgrace. He carried with him detailed notes on human anatomy and physiology that he had gathered through methods that would have horrified even the medical community of his day. Martha Stanwood, his wife of 15 years, served as head nurse and administrative manager of their private facility. To neighbors and visiting family members, she appeared as the perfect Victorian wife, demure, pious, and entirely devoted to supporting her husband's humanitarian work. In reality, Martha possessed a clinical detachment that allowed her to assist in procedures that would have broken the spirit of hardened battlefield surgeons. Her gentle voice and maternal demeanor proved invaluable in calming terrified patients during their final moments. The Stanwood children grew up witnessing horrors that shaped them into perfect accomplices. Marcus, the eldest at 24 in 1829, had inherited his father's intellectual curiosity and his mother's emotional coldness. He served as his father's primary assistant, demonstrating a natural aptitude for surgical procedures and a disturbing enthusiasm for pushing the boundaries of human endurance. Prudence, 22, and unmarried by design, managed the facility's extensive records with meticulous precision, documenting every aspect of their operations in coded language that could pass casual inspection. Tobias, the youngest at 19, handled the physical labor of the operation, maintaining the grounds, disposing of evidence, and ensuring that no trace of their activities reached the outside world. The family's first victim arrived on a cold February morning in 1829. Eleanor Whitmore, daughter of a prominent Hartford banking family, had been sent to the Stanwood facility after a series of public outbursts that her family attributed to feminine hysteria. At 19, Eleanor possessed a sharp intellect and strong will that her family found increasingly difficult to manage in a society that demanded complete female submission. Her father, desperate to avoid scandal, gladly paid the substantial fees that Dr. Stanwood required for his specialized treatment program. Eleanor's letters home, carefully censored by Prudence Stanwood, initially described a peaceful environment focused on rest and gentle therapy. She wrote of long walks in the estate gardens, nutritious meals, and conversations with Dr. Stanwood about philosophy and literature. Her family was relieved to see their daughter apparently responding well to treatment, unaware that the real Eleanor Whitmore had been dead for 3 weeks, her body carefully dissected in the basement laboratory while Prudence crafted increasingly sparse correspondence designed to gradually prepare the family for news of a tragic but natural death. The Stanwood method proved devastatingly effective. Wealthy families, already ashamed of their relatives' mental afflictions, were eager to maintain distance and privacy during treatment. They readily accepted explanations about the therapeutic necessity of limited contact, particularly when Dr. Stanwood's reputation continued to grow through carefully cultivated relationships with Connecticut's medical and social elite. His occasional lectures at Yale Medical School and his published papers on progressive treatment methods established him as a pioneer in humane care for the mentally ill, while his basement laboratory accumulated an ever-growing collection of preserved organs and detailed anatomical drawings based on living subjects. The success of the Eleanor Whitmore case emboldened the Stanwood family to refine their methods and expand their operations. Word of Dr. Stanwood's apparent therapeutic breakthrough spread through Connecticut's elite social circles, carried by Eleanor's own father who praised the doctor's compassionate care during his daughter's final illness. The irony was not lost on Cornelius Stanwood, who found dark amusement in receiving gratitude from the very man whose daughter's screams had echoed through his laboratory for weeks before her merciful death. By the spring of 1830, 3 more patients had arrived at the Stanwood Private Sanitarium. Each followed the same carefully orchestrated pattern: initial letters describing peaceful surroundings and gradual improvement, followed by increasingly infrequent correspondence as their supposed conditions required more intensive treatment and isolation. The families, desperate to maintain social respectability, willingly accepted these explanations and continued sending monthly payments that far exceeded the cost of legitimate medical care. Martha Stanwood proved instrumental in managing the family's expectations and emotions. Her background as the daughter of a respected minister provided her with an understanding of human psychology that she weaponized with chilling effectiveness. She crafted letters that struck the perfect balance between hope and resignation, preparing grieving parents for loss while maintaining their faith in the treatment process. Her ability to quote scripture and offer spiritual comfort made her letters treasured documents that families often shared with their pastors and close friends, inadvertently spreading the Stanwood reputation throughout Connecticut's religious communities. The physical transformation of the Stanwood estate reflected their growing confidence and success. What had begun as a modest adaptation of existing rooms evolved into a sophisticated facility designed specifically for their dual purposes. The mansion's first floor maintained the appearance of a refined medical establishment, with a proper reception area, consultation rooms decorated with impressive medical texts and certificates, and comfortable quarters for patients during their initial adjustment period. Visiting family members saw exactly what they expected: a progressive institution focused on dignity and healing. The basement told a different story entirely. Marcus Stanwood had demonstrated remarkable ingenuity in converting the mansion's foundation into a fully equipped laboratory and surgical suite. Stone walls provided excellent soundproofing, while the natural coolness of the underground space proved ideal for preserving specimens and maintaining sanitary conditions during procedures. He installed drainage systems that allowed for easy cleanup, ventilation that prevented the accumulation of noxious gases, and storage areas for the growing collection of anatomical specimens that formed the foundation of his father's research. Prudence Stanwood's record-keeping system evolved into a masterpiece of deception and organization. She maintained 3 separate sets of documents, official medical records that could withstand casual inspection by authorities or family members, coded research notes that documented the true nature of their experiments, and detailed financial ledgers that tracked income from families alongside expenses for facility maintenance and body disposal. Her system was so comprehensive that it would later provide prosecutors with irrefutable evidence of the family's crimes, though she could never have anticipated that her meticulous documentation would ultimately seal their fate. The arrival of Jonathan Prescott in July 1830 marked a significant escalation in the Stanwood family's methods. Unlike their previous victims, who had suffered from genuine but manageable mental conditions, Prescott was a healthy young man whose only crime was threatening to expose his father's business partner's embezzlement scheme. His wealthy father saw an opportunity to silence his troublesome son while maintaining family honor, paying Dr. Stanwood an enormous sum to provide indefinite treatment for what he described as dangerous delusions and violent tendencies. Prescott's intelligence and physical strength presented new challenges that forced the family to refine their approach. Marcus Stanwood began experimenting with chemical restraints, testing various combinations of laudanum and other substances to maintain control while preserving his subject's consciousness for research purposes. The young man's prolonged suffering provided valuable data about human endurance and pain tolerance that Dr. Stanwood carefully documented in his research notes, treating Prescott's agony as a fascinating scientific phenomenon rather than a moral horror. The psychological impact on the Stanwood children became increasingly apparent as their operation expanded. Marcus developed an almost scholarly fascination with human anatomy that divorced him from any emotional connection to his victims' humanity. He spoke of patients as specimens, referring to them by number rather than name and displaying their preserved organs with the pride of a collector showing off rare equisities. His transformation from a young man with medical aspirations into a cold-blooded killer demonstrated how gradually one could cross moral boundaries when surrounded by enabling family members. The winter of 1831 brought a steady stream of new patients to the Stanwood facility, each representing a different aspect of wealthy families' shame and desperation. Dr. Stanwood had begun advertising his services through discreet channels, cultivating relationships with family attorneys and private physicians who encountered clients struggling with inconvenient relatives. His reputation as a doctor who could make difficult problems disappear permanently spread through whispered conversations in private clubs and drawing rooms across New England. Tobias Stanwood's role evolved significantly during this period as the family's operations required increasingly sophisticated disposal methods. The youngest family member had initially served as groundskeeper and general laborer, but his father recognized the boy's natural aptitude for solving practical problems. Tobias designed an elaborate system of lime pits hidden throughout the estate's extensive grounds, carefully mapped and catalogued by Prudence to ensure efficient use of space and minimize the risk of accidental discovery by visitors or staff. The arrival of the Blackwood twins in March 1831 presented unique opportunities for comparative research that Dr. Stanwood found irresistible. Margaret and Elizabeth Blackwood, 17-year-old daughters of a prominent Boston merchant, had been sent to the facility after their father discovered their involvement in abolitionist activities that threatened his business relationships with Southern cotton suppliers. The girls' identical genetics provided perfect subjects for testing how different treatment methods affected similar physiological systems. Dr. Stanwood's research notes from this period reveal the full extent of his scientific detachment from human suffering. He subjected one twin to gradual poisoning with various substances while using the other as a control subject, carefully documenting the progression of symptoms and comparing their responses to identical stimuli. The twins' desperate attempts to comfort each other during their ordeal provided additional data about psychological trauma and its physical manifestations, observations that Stanwood recorded with the same clinical precision he applied to their deteriorating vital signs. Martha Stanwood's correspondence with the Blackwood family during this period demonstrates her masterful manipulation of parental emotions. She crafted letters describing the twins' gradual acceptance of their father's wisdom in sending them for treatment, their growing understanding of proper feminine behavior, and their expressed desire to make amends for their previous rebellious actions. The fictional narrative she created of two young women learning to embrace traditional roles resonated perfectly with their father's wishes, ensuring continued payments and discouraging visits that might reveal the truth. The development of Marcus Stanwood's surgical skills accelerated dramatically as the family's victim count increased. Working without formal training beyond his father's guidance, he began attempting increasingly complex procedures that legitimate surgeons of the era would have considered impossible or unethical. His lack of proper medical education became an advantage in some respects, as he felt no obligation to follow established protocols or consider patient welfare during experimental operations. The basement laboratory expanded to include specialized equipment that Marcus designed and constructed himself. He built restraining devices that allowed for precise positioning during procedures, developed improved ventilation systems that prevented the accumulation of harmful gases, and created storage solutions for the growing collection of preserved specimens that documented their research. His innovations demonstrated a mechanical aptitude that might have served legitimate medical advancement under different circumstances. Prudence Stanwood's psychological transformation during this period revealed disturbing parallels to her brother's evolution. Her daily exposure to detailed documentation of human suffering gradually eroded her emotional responses until she could record the most horrific details with perfect composure. She began suggesting improvements to experimental procedures, offering insights based on her careful observation of patient responses and her analysis of previous cases. Her contributions to the family's operations extended far beyond simple record-keeping into active participation in planning and execution. The community's perception of the Stanwood family remained overwhelmingly positive throughout 1831, despite the dramatic increase in their activities. Dr. Stanwood's public lectures on progressive treatment methods drew standing room-only audiences at Yale Medical School, while Martha's charitable work with local churches enhanced their reputation for Christian compassion. The family's ability to maintain their facade while conducting increasingly horrific activities in their basement laboratory demonstrated the power of social expectations and the reluctance of respectable communities to investigate respected neighbors. By December 1831, the Stanwood Private Sanitarium had processed 15 patients in just 3 years of operation. Only 4 had emerged alive, and those survivors bore psychological scars that would haunt them for life. The family's growing confidence led to increasingly bold victim selection, targeting individuals whose disappearances might attract more attention from authorities or whose families possessed greater resources for investigation. This escalation would ultimately contribute to their downfall, but in 1831 they appeared untouchable. The year 1832 marked a pivotal transformation in the Stanwood family's methodology as they refined their victim selection criteria to maximize both profit and minimize risk. Dr. Stanwood had begun studying the social dynamics of wealthy families with scientific precision, identifying patterns that predicted which relatives would be most easily abandoned and which families would prove most cooperative in maintaining secrecy about their loved ones' treatment. The ideal victims shared specific characteristics that the family had identified through careful analysis of their previous cases. Unmarried women past the age of 25 faced particular vulnerability, as their families viewed them as burdens who consumed resources without providing social or economic benefits. Young men whose behavior threatened family reputations through gambling, drinking, or political activism also proved excellent targets, since their disappearance often brought relief rather than genuine grief to their relatives. Religious families presented especially promising opportunities, as their shame about mental illness combined with their fear of social judgment made them eager to embrace any solution that promised discretion and divine blessing. Martha Stanwood's ministerial background allowed her to speak their language fluently, quoting scripture and offering spiritual comfort that convinced families their decision to institutionalize difficult relatives represented God's will rather than abandonment. The arrival of Samuel Whitmore in April 1832 demonstrated the family's growing sophistication in victim acquisition. Eleanor's younger brother had spent months investigating his sister's death, refusing to accept the official explanation of natural causes and demanding to examine her body. His persistent questions and threats to involve authorities made him a dangerous liability, but they also presented an opportunity to eliminate a potential threat while acquiring another subject for research. Dr. Stanwood arranged Samuel's commitment through a complex scheme involving forged medical documents and bribed physicians who testified to the young man's dangerous delusions about his sister's treatment. The irony of using Samuel's accurate suspicions as evidence of mental illness appealed to the doctor's sense of intellectual superiority, while the practical benefits of silencing a persistent investigator served their operational security needs perfectly. Marcus Stanwood's surgical techniques had evolved significantly by 1832, incorporating innovations that pushed the boundaries of contemporary medical knowledge. His experiments with anesthesia using various combinations of ether, chloroform, and laudanum allowed him to perform procedures that would have been impossible with fully conscious subjects, while his development of improved surgical instruments enabled more precise and detailed anatomical studies. The basement laboratory had expanded to include a dedicated surgical theater with proper lighting, ventilation, and drainage systems that rivaled legitimate medical facilities of the era. Marcus had designed specialized tables with adjustable positioning mechanisms, restraint systems that prevented movement during procedures, and storage areas for instruments and specimens that maintained optimal conditions for preservation and study. Prudence Stanwood's record-keeping system had evolved into a sophisticated database that tracked not only individual cases but also broader patterns in family behavior, social dynamics, and investigative risks. Her analysis of which families proved most cooperative and which generated the most problems helped guide future victim selection strategies, while her detailed financial records ensured optimal pricing for their services based on family wealth and desperation levels. The psychological profiles that Prudence developed for each victim demonstrated disturbing insights into human nature and social dynamics. She identified which personality types proved most resistant to their treatment methods, which families were most likely to investigate suspicious circumstances, and which social connections might pose risks to their operations. Her work represented a dark mirror of legitimate psychological research, applied to predatory rather than therapeutic purposes. Tobias Stanwood's disposal methods had reached new levels of sophistication by 1832, incorporating chemical processes that accelerated decomposition and reduced the volume of physical evidence. His network of lime pits throughout the estate grounds had expanded to include multiple sites with different characteristics optimized for various types of remains, while his understanding of soil chemistry allowed him to minimize the risk of detection through ground disturbance or unusual vegetation patterns. The family's financial success during this period enabled them to invest in improved security measures and operational infrastructure. They purchased additional property to expand their disposal capabilities, hired carefully selected staff members who could be trusted with sensitive information, and established relationships with corrupt officials who could provide advance warning of potential investigations or redirect unwanted attention from their activities. Dr. Stanwood's public reputation continued to flourish despite the dramatic increase in his criminal activities. His published research on progressive treatment methods, based on observations of his victims' responses to various procedures, earned recognition from medical journals and invitations to speak at prestigious institutions. The academic respectability that his work provided served as perfect cover for his basement laboratory's horrific activities. The community's continued acceptance of the Stanwood family throughout 1832 demonstrated the power of social class and professional reputation in deflecting scrutiny. Neighbors who might have questioned suspicious activities from less respectable residents readily accepted explanations from a prominent physician and his devoutly religious family, while the discreet nature of their wealthy clientele ensured that few outsiders had reason to investigate their operations closely. The peak years of the Stanwood operation, spanning 1833 through 1835, witnessed an unprecedented expansion that transformed their modest family enterprise into a sophisticated network of horror that reached across multiple states. Dr. Stanwood had begun establishing relationships with similar-minded physicians in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and New York, creating a referral system that allowed for the discreet transfer of particularly problematic cases between facilities when local scrutiny became too intense. The Harrison family tragedy of 1834 exemplified the Stanwood method at its most ruthlessly efficient. Thomas Harrison, a wealthy Hartford textile manufacturer, faced the challenge of 3 adult children whose various afflictions threatened to destroy his business reputation and social standing. His eldest daughter Catherine suffered from what contemporary medicine labeled hysteria but which modern understanding would recognize as depression following repeated miscarriages. His son William had developed an addiction to laudanum after a riding accident, while his youngest daughter Mary had begun expressing radical political views about women's rights that horrified her conservative family. If this chilling tale of family destruction is sending shivers down your spine, you're not alone in confronting these dark truths about our nation's hidden past. Share this investigation with someone who appreciates real mystery and hit that like button to support our mission of bringing suppressed stories to light. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss these revelations that powerful families tried to bury forever. Rather than deal with 3 separate scandals that could destroy his reputation, Harrison contacted Dr. Stanwood about the possibility of treating all 3 children simultaneously at the private sanitarium. The substantial payment he offered for this service exceeded the annual income of most Connecticut physicians, making it impossible for the Stanwood family to refuse despite the logistical challenges of processing multiple victims from the same family. The arrival of the 3 Harrison siblings in September 1834 required careful coordination to prevent them from communicating with each other or combining their efforts to resist treatment. Marcus Stanwood developed a rotation system that ensured no 2 siblings were conscious simultaneously during the initial assessment period, while Prudence created separate communication channels with the Harrison family for each child to prevent inconsistencies in their fictional progress reports. Dr. Stanwood's research during this period focused on comparative studies of genetic predisposition to various medical conditions, using the Harrison siblings as test subjects for experiments that examined how shared heredity influenced responses to different treatment methods. His notes reveal particular interest in pain tolerance variations between the siblings and their different reactions to psychological torture techniques designed to break their resistance to his procedures. The basement laboratory reached its maximum capacity during the Harrison case, requiring Marcus to construct additional holding areas and expand the ventilation system to accommodate multiple subjects simultaneously. His engineering skills proved invaluable in creating soundproof chambers that prevented the siblings from hearing each other's suffering, while specialized restraint systems allowed for quick movement of subjects between different experimental areas. Martha Stanwood's correspondence with Thomas Harrison during his children's treatment demonstrates her masterful manipulation of parental guilt and hope. She crafted a narrative of gradual improvement punctuated by temporary setbacks that required extended treatment, convincing the wealthy father that his patience and continued financial support represented the difference between his children's salvation and their permanent loss to mental illness. The psychological impact of the Harrison case on the Stanwood family revealed how completely they had embraced their criminal identity. Prudence's records show increasing enthusiasm for the intellectual challenges of managing complex deceptions, while her detailed observations of victim behavior suggest genuine fascination with human suffering rather than mere clinical detachment. Her evolution from reluctant participant to active collaborator marked a crucial transformation in the family dynamic. Tobias Stanwood's disposal methods faced their greatest test during the Harrison case, as 3 bodies required processing within a relatively short timeframe without attracting attention from estate staff or neighboring properties. His solution involved a carefully orchestrated schedule that distributed the work across several weeks, utilizing different disposal sites and varying his methods to prevent patterns that might be detected by future investigators. The success of the Harrison case established the Stanwood family's reputation among New England's wealthiest families as specialists in solving complex family problems that conventional medicine could not address. Word of their apparent success in treating multiple afflictions simultaneously spread through private channels, generating requests for similar services from families across the region who faced comparable challenges with difficult relatives. Dr. Stanwood's academic career reached new heights during this period, with his research papers on family-based treatment approaches earning invitations to present at medical conferences in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. The irony of his growing professional recognition based on observations of systematic murder was not lost on him, and his private writings reveal sardonic amusement at the medical establishment's eagerness to embrace his findings without questioning their origins. The financial rewards from their expanded operations allowed the family to invest in sophisticated security measures and operational improvements that further reduced their risk of detection. They purchased additional properties that could serve as alternate disposal sites, established relationships with corrupt officials in multiple jurisdictions, and created false identities that would allow them to relocate quickly if their activities were discovered. The autumn of 1835 brought the first serious threat to the Stanwood operation when Robert Brennan arrived unannounced at the estate, demanding to see his brother Thomas, who had been admitted 6 months earlier for treatment of what the family described as violent outbursts and dangerous delusions. Unlike previous family members who had accepted the Stanwoods' explanations and restrictions, Robert possessed both the legal knowledge of a practicing attorney and the financial resources to pursue an independent investigation. Dr. Stanwood's initial attempts to deflect Robert's inquiries using his standard explanations about therapeutic isolation and the dangers of premature family contact met with unexpected resistance. The attorney demanded to examine his brother's medical records, questioned the absence of other physicians involved in Thomas's care, and insisted on speaking with staff members who could provide independent verification of his brother's condition and progress. The crisis forced the family to implement emergency protocols they had developed but never tested under real-world conditions. Marcus Stanwood worked frantically to prepare a substitute patient who could briefly impersonate Thomas during a carefully controlled visit, while Prudence created false medical records that would satisfy superficial examination but avoid specific details that might expose inconsistencies in their fabricated treatment history. Martha Stanwood's role became crucial in managing Robert Brennan's emotional state during his unexpected visit. She employed every manipulation technique in her considerable arsenal, combining Christian sympathy with professional authority to convince the distraught brother that his demands for immediate access could destroy months of delicate progress. Her ability to quote medical terminology alongside scriptural references created an impression of both scientific competence and moral authority that temporarily satisfied Robert's concerns. The substitute patient plan nearly resulted in disaster when the man they had selected to impersonate Thomas proved unable to maintain the deception under Robert's persistent questioning. The real Thomas Brennan had possessed specific knowledge about family history and shared experiences that their hastily prepared substitute could not replicate convincingly, forcing Dr. Stanwood to intervene with claims that his patient's memory had been severely affected by his mental condition. Robert Brennan's legal training made him particularly dangerous because he understood which questions would expose weaknesses in their explanations and which documentation would be required to verify their claims. His systematic approach to gathering information threatened to uncover discrepancies that less sophisticated family members had failed to notice, while his professional connections provided access to medical experts who could evaluate the legitimacy of his brother's treatment. The family's response to this threat revealed both their resourcefulness and their willingness to eliminate anyone who posed serious risks to their operation. They began gathering information about Robert's personal life, professional relationships, and potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited to discredit his concerns or neutralize his investigation through blackmail or intimidation. Tobias Stanwood received his first assignment to eliminate a potential witness when Dr. Stanwood determined that their groundskeeper, an elderly man named Samuel Mills, had overheard too many suspicious conversations and observed too many unusual activities around the estate. The old man's growing nervousness and increasingly frequent questions about the sounds he heard coming from the basement at night made him a liability that could no longer be tolerated. The elimination of Samuel Mills marked a significant escalation in the family's criminal activities, as they moved beyond targeting patients delivered by their families to actively murdering anyone who threatened their security. Tobias's method proved both efficient and undetectable, as he arranged for the groundskeeper to suffer an apparent accident while cleaning equipment near one of the estate's lime pits. Marcus Stanwood's paranoia reached new levels following the Brennan incident, leading him to redesign the basement laboratory with multiple escape routes and improved soundproofing that would prevent future security breaches. His modifications included hidden passages that connected to the estate's wine cellar and storage areas, allowing rapid evacuation of evidence or witnesses if unexpected visitors arrived. Prudent Stanwood's record-keeping system expanded to include detailed surveillance notes on potential threats, family members who asked too many questions, and community members who showed unusual interest in their operations. Her intelligence-gathering efforts extended beyond their immediate patients to encompass anyone whose curiosity or professional obligations might lead them to investigate the private sanitarium too closely. The psychological toll of maintaining their operation under increased scrutiny began to manifest in different ways among the family members. Dr. Stanwood's public lectures became more aggressive in defending controversial treatment methods, while Martha's charitable work intensified as she sought to strengthen community relationships that could provide protection against future investigations. The family's growing isolation from normal social interactions accelerated their descent into complete moral detachment from their victims' humanity. Their dinner conversations routinely included discussions of experimental procedures, disposal methods, and victim selection strategies that would have horrified any outsider, but which they treated as mundane business matters requiring practical solutions. Robert Brennan's investigation continued throughout the winter of 1835, as he employed private investigators to examine the Stanwood family's background and hired independent physicians to evaluate the medical explanations he had received about his brother's condition. His persistence forced the family to maintain constant vigilance and develop increasingly sophisticated counterintelligence measures to monitor his activities and anticipate his next moves. The spring of 1836 introduced a new adversary who would prove far more tenacious and resourceful than Robert Brennan had ever been. James Hartwell, a Boston merchant and former military officer, arrived in Millbrook with a methodical determination that immediately distinguished him from the grieving family members the Stanwoods had successfully manipulated in the past. His sister Catherine had been committed to the private sanitarium 8 months earlier, and his investigation into her disappearance would ultimately unravel the entire operation. Unlike previous family members who had accepted the Stanwoods' explanations about therapeutic isolation, Hartwell possessed both the investigative skills acquired during his military service and the financial resources to conduct an independent inquiry into his sister's treatment. His initial approach appeared deceptively conventional, as he politely requested meetings with Dr. Stanwood and expressed appropriate concern about Catherine's welfare, but his questions revealed a sharp intelligence that immediately put the family on high alert. Hartwell's background as a military logistics officer had taught him to identify inconsistencies in official reports and documentation, skills that proved invaluable in detecting the flaws in the Stanwoods' carefully constructed deceptions. His systematic examination of Catherine's supposed medical records revealed subtle contradictions in dates, treatments, and progress reports that individually seemed insignificant but collectively suggested deliberate falsification. The intensity of this investigation is exactly why stories like these remained buried for so long, hidden by powerful families who controlled the narrative of American history. If you're brave enough to hear the complete truth about how corruption and wealth enabled these horrors, hit that share button and spread this story to others who refuse to let victims be forgotten. Subscribe to join our community of truth seekers who demand accountability from the past. Dr. Stanwood's attempts to deflect Hartwell's inquiries using his standard repertoire of medical explanations and religious justifications met with polite but persistent resistance. The former officer's training had taught him to maintain emotional control during interrogations, preventing the Stanwoods from exploiting grief or desperation as they had with previous family members. His calm professionalism masked a growing suspicion that something fundamentally wrong was occurring at the private sanitarium. Martha Stanwood found herself unable to manipulate Hartwell using the techniques that had proven so effective with other family members. Her combination of maternal sympathy and religious authority failed to penetrate his analytical approach to gathering information, while her attempts to redirect his concerns toward spiritual acceptance of God's will were met with respectful but firm requests for specific medical documentation. The formation of a citizens' committee in late 1836 represented the Stanwood family's worst nightmare realized. Hartwell's investigation had uncovered enough inconsistencies to convince several prominent Millbrook residents that the private sanitarium deserved closer scrutiny, particularly given the unusually high mortality rate among patients and the secretive nature of the facility's operations. Committee members included Judge William Porter, whose legal expertise complemented Hartwell's investigative skills, Dr. Henry Morrison, a respected physician who could evaluate the medical claims made by the Stanwood family, and Reverend Samuel Clark, whose moral authority lent credibility to their concerns about potential wrongdoing at the facility. The combination of legal, medical, and religious leadership made the committee's inquiries impossible to dismiss or deflect. Prudence Stanwood's intelligence-gathering efforts intensified dramatically as she worked to identify potential threats among the committee members and their supporters. Her surveillance network expanded to include domestic servants, shop clerks, and other community members who could provide information about the committee's private discussions and planned activities, while her analysis of their individual vulnerabilities suggested possible strategies for neutralizing their investigation. Marcus Stanwood's response to the growing threat involved preparing contingency plans for rapid evidence destruction and facility evacuation if the committee's investigation progressed beyond informal inquiries to official legal action. His modifications to the basement laboratory included improved ventilation systems that could quickly remove chemical odors, hidden storage areas for sensitive equipment and specimens, and emergency protocols for disposing of incriminating materials. The psychological pressure on the family began manifesting in increasingly erratic behavior that threatened to expose their carefully maintained facade of respectability. Dr. Stanwood's public lectures became more defensive and aggressive when questioned about controversial treatment methods, while his drinking increased noticeably during social events where he might encounter committee members or their supporters. Tobias Stanwood received orders to begin surveillance of key committee members, tracking their movements and identifying opportunities for intimidation or elimination if diplomatic solutions proved insufficient. His network of contacts among the community's less respectable elements provided access to information about the committee members' personal lives and potential leverage that could be used to discourage their investigation. The discovery of Catherine Hartwell's jewelry hidden in Prudence's bedroom dresser provided the first concrete evidence of criminal activity at the private sanitarium. A domestic servant, Sarah Mills, the widow of the murdered groundskeeper, had been conducting her own secret investigation motivated by suspicions about her husband's death and her observations of unusual activities around the estate. Sarah Mills's testimony would eventually prove crucial in exposing the full scope of the Stanwood crimes, but her initial approach to James Hartwell required careful consideration of her own safety and credibility. As the widow of a man who had died under suspicious circumstances while employed by the family, she understood that her accusations would need substantial evidence to overcome the Stanwoods' reputation and social standing. The Citizens Committee's decision to petition Connecticut authorities for an official investigation marked a point of no return in the conflict between the Stanwood family and their growing number of adversaries. The formal legal process would require documentation and testimony that could not be easily dismissed or manipulated, while the involvement of state officials would bring investigative resources that far exceeded anything the family had previously encountered. The winter of 1837 brought a cascade of revelations that shattered the Stanwood family's carefully constructed facade as Sarah Mills's evidence prompted a more aggressive investigation by the Citizens Committee. Her discovery of Catherine Hartwell's distinctive pearl necklace, along with several other pieces of jewelry belonging to patients who had supposedly died of natural causes, provided tangible proof that the private sanitarium was systematically stealing from families while concealing the true circumstances of their loved ones' deaths. James Hartwell's methodical examination of the jewelry confirmed his worst suspicions about his sister's fate. Catherine's necklace bore a unique engraving that their father had commissioned for her 18th birthday, making its presence in Prudence Stanwood's possession impossible to explain through legitimate means. The discovery transformed Hartwell's investigation from a search for his missing sister into a quest for justice for all the victims who had suffered at the hands of the Stanwood family. Dr. Morrison's medical evaluation of the death certificates provided by the Stanwood family revealed a pattern of inconsistencies that no legitimate physician could have produced accidentally. The causes of death listed for various patients contradicted each other in impossible ways, while the progression of symptoms described in the medical records defied established understanding of how diseases developed and resolved. The Citizens Committee's formal petition to Connecticut authorities triggered an official investigation that brought resources and legal authority far beyond anything the Stanwood family had previously encountered. State investigators arrived in Millbrook with subpoena powers, forensic expertise, and the ability to compel testimony from witnesses who had previously been too frightened or intimidated to speak openly about their suspicions. Sarah Mills's detailed testimony about her husband's death and her subsequent observations of unusual activities at the estate provided investigators with a roadmap for understanding the scope and methods of the Stanwood operation. Her account of strange sounds emanating from the basement during nighttime hours, the frequent delivery of lime and other chemicals to the property, and the family's paranoid behavior regarding visitors painted a picture of systematic criminal activity disguised as medical treatment. The examination of Samuel Mills's supposed accident revealed evidence of deliberate murder that had been carefully staged to appear natural. The positioning of his body near the lime pit showed signs of struggle that contradicted the official explanation of an accidental fall, while the condition of his clothing and injury suggested he had been attacked before being placed at the scene. Prudence Stanwood's response to the intensifying investigation revealed the extent to which she had become the operational mastermind of the family's criminal enterprise. Her attempts to destroy incriminating records were systematic and thorough, but her meticulous nature had created so many duplicate documents and backup systems that complete elimination of evidence proved impossible within the limited time available. The discovery of the coded ledger system hidden behind the false wall in the basement marked the beginning of the end for the Stanwood family. The detailed records that Prudence had maintained for years, intended to protect the family by documenting their methods and justifications, became irrefutable evidence of premeditated murder conducted on an unprecedented scale. Marcus Stanwood's laboratory equipment and specimen collection provided physical evidence that corroborated the horrific details recorded in his sister's ledgers. The basement facility contained surgical instruments, restraint devices, and preservation systems that could only have been used for experimental procedures on living subjects, while the collection of human organs and tissue samples documented years of systematic torture and murder. The psychological evaluation of the surviving victims who had been released from the private sanitarium revealed the lasting trauma inflicted by their experiences. Their testimony about the treatment methods employed by the Stanwood family provided crucial details about the family's operational procedures, while their descriptions of other patients they had encountered helped investigators identify additional victims whose families had never been contacted. Dr. Stanwood's attempts to maintain his innocence became increasingly desperate as evidence mounted against him and his family. His claims that the deaths had resulted from legitimate medical complications were contradicted by the physical evidence found in his basement laboratory, while his explanations for the presence of stolen jewelry and forged documents became more implausible with each new revelation. Martha Stanwood's role as the family's primary contact with victim families made her particularly vulnerable to charges of fraud and conspiracy. Her correspondence with grieving relatives, carefully preserved in Prudence's files, revealed a systematic pattern of deception designed to extract maximum payments while preventing investigation into the true circumstances of their loved one's treatment. The community's reaction to the unfolding revelations demonstrated how completely the Stanwood family had deceived their neighbors and colleagues. Prominent citizens who had praised Dr. Stanwood's humanitarian work and charitable contributions struggled to reconcile their positive impressions with the overwhelming evidence of his criminal activities, while religious leaders who had embraced Martha's apparent piety grappled with their own complicity in enabling the family's operation. Tobias Stanwood's network of disposal sites throughout the estate grounds became the focus of intensive forensic investigation as authorities worked to identify and recover the remains of victims whose families deserved proper burial and closure. The sophisticated system of lime pits and chemical processing areas revealed the industrial scale of the family's murder operation and the cold calculation involved in concealing their crimes. The confrontation that would finally expose the full scope of the Stanwood family's crimes began on a cold February morning in 1838 when James Hartwell arrived at the estate accompanied by Connecticut state investigators and a federal marshal armed with comprehensive search warrants. The family's 18-year reign of terror was about to end in a dramatic showdown that would reveal the true extent of their systematic murder operation. Dr. Stanwood's initial response to the arrival of law enforcement demonstrated the arrogance that had enabled his crimes for nearly 2 decades. He attempted to invoke his professional standing and social connections to dismiss the investigation as a misunderstanding orchestrated by disgruntled former patients and their vindictive families. His confident demeanor began to crack only when investigators presented the stolen jewelry and demanded access to areas of the estate that had been strictly off-limits to previous visitors. Martha Stanwood's reaction revealed the calculating intelligence that had made her such an effective partner in the family's criminal enterprise. Rather than panic or attempt to flee, she began systematically destroying documents and evidence while maintaining a facade of cooperative innocence. Her actions during those crucial first hours demonstrated her understanding that their survival depended on eliminating as much incriminating material as possible before investigators could secure the premises. Marcus Stanwood's desperate attempt to destroy the basement laboratory nearly succeeded in concealing the most damning evidence of their crimes. He had prepared emergency protocols for rapid disposal of equipment and specimens, including chemical processes that could dissolve organic materials and acid solutions that could destroy metal instruments. Only the unexpected speed of the investigation prevented him from completing the destruction of evidence that would later prove crucial in securing convictions. The discovery of living victims hidden in the basement shocked even experienced investigators who had prepared themselves for the worst possible scenarios. 3 patients, including a young woman who had been subjected to experimental procedures for over 6 months, were found in conditions that defied contemporary understanding of human endurance and medical ethics. Their rescue provided eyewitness testimony that corroborated the physical evidence found throughout the facility. Prudence Stanwood's final act of defiance involved setting fire to the mansion's main floor in a desperate attempt to destroy the extensive records that documented every aspect of their operation. Her systematic approach to evidence destruction, the same meticulous attention to detail that had enabled their crimes, ultimately worked against the family as investigators were able to recover enough surviving documents to reconstruct the scope of their activities. The fire that engulfed portions of the Stanwood mansion created a dramatic backdrop for the family's final confrontation with justice. Tobias Stanwood was captured while attempting to escape through the estate's underground tunnel system, his knowledge of hidden passages and emergency routes proving insufficient against the coordinated law enforcement response that had surrounded the property. James Hartwell's personal confrontation with Dr. Stanwood provided a moment of dramatic resolution as the merchant demanded answers about his sister's fate while investigators secured the basement laboratory. The physician's attempts to justify his actions through appeals to scientific progress and medical advancement rang hollow in the face of overwhelming evidence of deliberate torture and murder conducted for personal profit rather than legitimate research. The basement laboratory's preservation despite the fire above provided investigators with an intact crime scene that documented the family's methods in horrific detail. The surgical equipment, restraint devices, specimen storage systems, and detailed anatomical drawings created an irrefutable record of systematic human experimentation that exceeded the worst atrocities committed by legitimate medical researchers of the era. Martha Stanwood's arrest as she attempted to flee through the estate's gardens marked the end of her role as the family's primary liaison with victim families. The correspondence found in her possession included draft letters designed to extract additional payments from families whose relatives had already been murdered, revealing the calculated cruelty that had characterized her approach to manipulating grieving parents and siblings. The capture of Marcus and Prudence Stanwood as they tried to escape through separate routes demonstrated their understanding that the family's criminal enterprise had finally been exposed beyond any possibility of concealment or denial. Their individual attempts to flee suggested a breakdown in family unity that had sustained their operation for 18 years, as each member prioritized personal survival over collective loyalty. The community's reaction to the dramatic events unfolding at the Stanwood estate reflected the shock and horror of residents who had unwittingly harbored one of the most prolific serial killing families in American history. Neighbors who had accepted the family's explanations and respected their privacy were forced to confront their own complicity in enabling crimes that had occurred literally next door to their homes. The initial inventory of evidence recovered from the estate suggested that the family's victim count far exceeded even the most pessimistic estimates of investigators and community members. The basement laboratory alone contained preserved specimens and research notes documenting procedures performed on dozens of subjects, while the disposal sites throughout the grounds would eventually yield remains representing years of systematic murder. The arrest of corrupt officials who had facilitated the Stanwood operation revealed the broader network of complicity that had enabled their crimes to continue undetected for nearly 2 decades. Local magistrates, medical examiners, and law enforcement officers who had accepted bribes or deliberately ignored suspicious circumstances faced their own legal consequences as the investigation expanded beyond the immediate family. The weeks following the Stanwood family's capture brought a flood of evidence that painted an even more horrific picture of their crimes than investigators had initially imagined. The painstaking excavation of the estate grounds revealed 37 sets of human remains buried in carefully mapped locations, each representing a life cut short by the family's systematic murder operation. The forensic examination of these remains would provide crucial evidence for the prosecution while offering some measure of closure to families who had spent years wondering about their missing relatives. Dr. Cornelius Stanwood's final desperate gambit involved attempting to negotiate immunity from prosecution in exchange for revealing the locations of additional victims and providing details about his research methods that could benefit legitimate medical science. His proposal demonstrated both his continued arrogance and his fundamental misunderstanding of how completely his actions had destroyed any possibility of redemption or mitigation. Martha Stanwood's strategy during interrogation revealed the calculating intelligence that had made her such an effective partner in the family's crimes. She attempted to portray herself as a victim of her husband's manipulation while simultaneously providing investigators with carefully selected information designed to minimize her own culpability. Her performance demonstrated the same manipulative skills she had used to deceive grieving families for 18 years. The examination of Prudence Stanwood's meticulously maintained records provided investigators with a complete roadmap of the family's operation, including victim selection criteria, operational procedures, financial arrangements, and disposal methods. Her obsessive documentation, intended to protect the family by recording their justifications and methods, became the prosecution's most powerful weapon in securing convictions. Marcus Stanwood's psychological evaluation revealed the complete moral detachment that had enabled him to conduct experimental procedures on living subjects without apparent emotional distress. His clinical descriptions of torture techniques and surgical experiments demonstrated how gradually one could cross ethical boundaries when surrounded by enabling family members who normalized increasingly extreme behavior. The recovery of Catherine Hartwell's remains from one of the estate's lime pits provided James Hartwell with the closure he had sought while confirming the worst fears about his sister's fate. The forensic evidence showed that she had survived for several weeks after her arrival at the facility, enduring multiple experimental procedures before finally succumbing to injuries that would have been immediately fatal if inflicted all at once. The testimony of surviving victims provided crucial eyewitness accounts of the family's methods and the systematic nature of their crimes. These survivors, whose psychological trauma would haunt them for life, courageously described the procedures they had endured and the other patients they had encountered during their captivity. Their willingness to relive their ordeal in public testimony ensured that the Stanwood family would face justice for their crimes. The financial investigation revealed the enormous profits generated by the family's murder operation, with payments from victim families totaling thousands of dollars per year at a time when most Americans earned less than $100 annually. The discovery of hidden bank accounts, property investments, and luxury purchases demonstrated how the family had used their victims' deaths to fund an extravagant lifestyle while maintaining their facade of humanitarian service. If you're feeling the weight of this unimaginable horror, know that you're not alone in demanding that these forgotten victims receive the justice they deserved. Share this investigation with others who believe powerful families shouldn't escape accountability, and hit that subscribe button to join our community dedicated to exposing the darkest chapters of American history that some would prefer remained buried forever. The broader investigation into similar facilities across New England revealed that the Stanwood operation was part of a larger network of corrupt physicians and institutions that exploited society's treatment of mental illness for personal gain. While none matched the systematic brutality of the Stanwood family, several other facilities faced investigation for suspicious death rates and questionable treatment methods that suggested widespread abuse within the private medical system. Tobias Stanwood's cooperation with investigators proved crucial in locating all the disposal sites and understanding the sophisticated methods the family had developed for concealing their crimes. His detailed knowledge of the estate's underground systems, chemical processes used for body disposal, and security measures implemented to prevent detection provided investigators with information that would have taken months to uncover through independent investigation. The legal proceedings faced unprecedented challenges as prosecutors worked to apply existing laws to crimes that exceeded contemporary understanding of systematic murder and organized criminal activity. The family's 18-year operation had generated thousands of pieces of evidence, dozens of witness testimonies, and complex financial records that required months of analysis to present coherently to a jury. The community's response to the revelations evolved from shock and horror to anger and demands for broader accountability among the officials and institutions that had enabled the Stanwood crimes through negligence or corruption. Town meetings drew hundreds of residents seeking answers about how such systematic evil could have operated undetected in their midst for nearly 2 decades. The psychological impact on law enforcement and court officials involved in the case created lasting trauma that affected their approach to future investigations and prosecutions. The evidence they examined and the testimony they heard challenged their fundamental understanding of human nature and the capacity for evil that could exist behind facades of respectability and community service. The press coverage of the Stanwood case attracted national attention as newspapers across the country struggled to convey the scope and brutality of the family's crimes to readers who had never encountered anything comparable in American criminal history. The detailed reporting of courtroom proceedings and evidence presentations educated the public about the vulnerabilities in society's treatment of mental illness while highlighting the need for regulatory oversight of private medical facilities. The trials of the Stanwood family members, beginning in the autumn of 1838, captivated the nation as prosecutors presented evidence of systematic murder that challenged contemporary understanding of criminal behavior and family dynamics. The legal proceedings faced unprecedented challenges in presenting complex evidence to juries who struggled to comprehend the scope and methodical nature of crimes that had continued undetected for 18 years. Dr. Cornelius Stanwood's trial revealed the full extent of his transformation from respected physician to calculating serial killer who had perverted medical knowledge into instruments of torture and murder. The prosecution's presentation of his research notes, surgical instruments, and preserved specimens created a horrific tableau that demonstrated how scientific curiosity without moral constraints could evolve into monstrous evil. The testimony of surviving victims provided the most powerful evidence against the family, as their accounts of systematic torture disguised as medical treatment left no doubt about the deliberate nature of the crimes. These brave individuals, whose psychological trauma would affect them for life, described procedures that violated every principle of medical ethics while serving no legitimate therapeutic purpose. Martha Stanwood's defense strategy attempted to portray her as a victim of her husband's manipulation and control, but the prosecution's presentation of her correspondence with victim families revealed a woman who had actively participated in deceiving grieving relatives while profiting from their loved ones' murders. Her letters demonstrated sophisticated psychological manipulation designed to extract maximum payments while preventing investigation. Marcus Stanwood's trial focused on his role as the primary implementer of his father's experimental procedures, with evidence showing that he had exceeded even his father's brutality in developing new methods of torture and murder. His detailed anatomical drawings and surgical notes revealed a young man who had embraced systematic killing with enthusiasm that shocked even experienced prosecutors. Prudence Stanwood's meticulous record-keeping proved to be both her greatest asset and ultimate downfall, as her detailed documentation provided prosecutors with irrefutable evidence of premeditated murder while also revealing her evolution from reluctant participant to active collaborator. Her coded ledgers contained information that allowed investigators to identify victims, understand operational procedures, and trace financial transactions that funded the family's criminal enterprise. The prosecution's presentation of financial evidence demonstrated how the family had transformed systematic murder into a profitable business enterprise that generated enormous wealth while maintaining facades of medical respectability and charitable service. Bank records, property investments, and luxury purchases revealed the extent to which they had prospered from their victims' suffering. The defense attorneys faced the impossible task of mitigating crimes that appeared to have no precedent in American legal history, with evidence so overwhelming that their only viable strategy involved attempting to secure life sentences rather than death penalties for their clients. Their arguments focused on mental illness, family dynamics, and gradual moral corruption rather than outright denial of the charges. The jury deliberations in each trial lasted only hours, as the overwhelming evidence left little room for doubt about the defendant's guilt. The systematic nature of the crimes, combined with the detailed documentation recovered from the estate, created an evidentiary record that made conviction inevitable despite the best efforts of experienced defense counsel. The sentencing phase revealed deep divisions within the legal community about appropriate punishment for crimes that exceeded existing precedents for brutality and systematic planning. Judges struggled to craft sentences that reflected both the severity of the crimes and the unprecedented nature of family-based serial killing that had operated as a criminal enterprise for nearly 2 decades. The broader implications of the Stanwood case extended far beyond the individual prosecutions, as reformers used the revelations to advocate for comprehensive changes in the regulation of private medical facilities and the treatment of mental illness. The family's ability to operate undetected for 18 years highlighted fundamental weaknesses in oversight systems that had allowed systematic abuse to flourish. The investigation's expansion into corrupt officials who had facilitated the Stanwood operation resulted in additional prosecutions that revealed the broader network of complicity necessary to sustain such systematic criminal activity. Local magistrates, medical examiners, and law enforcement officers who had accepted bribes or deliberately ignored suspicious circumstances faced their own legal consequences. The psychological evaluation of the Stanwood family members provided insights into how ordinary individuals could evolve into systematic killers when surrounded by enabling family members who normalized increasingly extreme behavior. The gradual escalation from legitimate medical practice to systematic murder demonstrated the power of family dynamics in shaping moral boundaries and ethical decision-making. The recovery and identification of victim remains continued throughout the trial proceedings as forensic experts worked to provide closure to families while gathering additional evidence for prosecution. The sophisticated disposal methods employed by the family had preserved enough physical evidence to confirm identities and causes of death for most victims, though some remains could never be definitively identified. The community's response to the trial revelations evolved from shock and horror to demands for systematic reforms that would prevent similar crimes in the future. Town meetings drew hundreds of residents seeking accountability from officials who had failed to investigate suspicious circumstances and demanding changes in oversight procedures for medical facilities and treatment of vulnerable populations. The executions of Dr. Cornelia Stanwood, Martha Stanwood, and Marcus Stanwood on a grey November morning in 1849 marked the final chapter of justice for crimes that had shocked the nation and forever changed how American society approached the regulation of medical practice and the protection of vulnerable populations. Their deaths, witnessed by hundreds of spectators who had traveled from across New England, provided a measure of closure for families whose loved ones had suffered unimaginable horrors at the hands of this murderous family. Prudence Stanwood's life sentence reflected both the jury's recognition of her extensive complicity in the family's crimes and their acknowledgement that her cooperation with investigators had been crucial in securing convictions against her relatives. She spent her remaining years in solitary confinement at the Connecticut State Prison for Women, where she died in 1867, having never expressed remorse for her role in systematic murder that had claimed at least 37 lives. Tobias Stanwood's cooperation with authorities earned him a reduced sentence of 25 years imprisonment, though he served only 18 before dying of tuberculosis in 1856. His detailed knowledge of the family's disposal methods and security procedures had proven invaluable to investigators, but his willingness to assist justice could never fully atone for his participation in eliminating witnesses and concealing evidence of his family's crimes. The demolition of the Stanwood mansion in 1850 represented the community's collective desire to erase physical reminders of the horrors that had occurred within its walls. The basement laboratory, with its sophisticated surgical equipment and specimen storage systems, was completely destroyed, while the estate grounds were transformed into a public cemetery where the identified victims received proper burial with headstones bearing their names and dates of birth. The legal precedents established by the Stanwood prosecutions influenced American criminal law for generations, as courts grappled with concepts of conspiracy, systematic murder, and family-based criminal enterprises that had previously existed only in theoretical discussions among legal scholars. The comprehensive documentation of their crimes provided a template for investigating and prosecuting similar cases that would emerge in later decades. The regulatory reforms implemented in response to the Stanwood revelations transformed the oversight of private medical facilities throughout New England and eventually across the nation. New laws required regular inspections, mandatory reporting of patient deaths, external verification of treatment methods, and criminal background checks for medical practitioners seeking to establish private institutions for the treatment of mental illness. James Hartwell's tireless investigation and pursuit of justice became a model for family advocacy that inspired legislation protecting the rights of patients and their relatives to maintain contact during treatment and receive independent medical opinions about proposed procedures. His refusal to accept official explanations and his systematic documentation of inconsistencies demonstrated how persistent individuals could challenge institutional authority and expose systematic corruption. The psychological impact on surviving victims extended far beyond their physical recovery, as they struggled with trauma that contemporary medicine was ill-equipped to address. Several survivors dedicated their remaining years to advocating for patient rights and supporting other victims of medical abuse, transforming their personal suffering into a force for protecting vulnerable populations from similar exploitation. The broader investigation into corrupt officials and complicit institutions revealed systematic weaknesses in oversight and accountability that had enabled the Stanwood family to operate undetected for 18 years. The prosecutions and dismissals that followed led to comprehensive reforms in local government, law enforcement procedures, and medical regulation that strengthened protections for citizens who depended on public officials for safety and justice. The memorial established for the Stanwood victims in 1851 honored not only those whose remains were recovered and identified but also the unknown number of individuals whose disappearances had never been properly investigated or whose families had been too ashamed or intimidated to pursue answers about their loved ones' fates. The memorial's inscription, suggested by James Hartwell, read simply, "In memory of those whose voices were silenced but whose suffering demands remembrance." What lessons can we draw from this chilling chapter of American history, and how do we honor the memory of those whose suffering was hidden for so long? The Stanwood case reminds us that evil can flourish behind facades of respectability and charitable service, but it also demonstrates the power of persistent individuals to expose truth and demand justice even when confronted by seemingly insurmountable obstacles. As we conclude this investigation into one of America's most horrific family crimes, we must remember that the victims of the Stanwood operation were not merely statistics or case studies but individuals with hopes, dreams, and families who loved them. Their deaths were not the result of medical misfortune or institutional failure but deliberate murder conducted by people who had sworn to heal and protect the vulnerable. The legacy of the Stanwood case extends beyond the specific reforms and legal precedents it established to encompass broader questions about how societies protect vulnerable populations and hold institutions accountable for their actions. The systematic nature of their crimes and the length of time they operated undetected serve as permanent reminders that vigilance and advocacy are essential safeguards against the abuse of power and authority. If this story has moved you to reflect on the importance of protecting those who cannot protect themselves, share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe to ensure that stories like these continue to be told. The victims of the Stanwood family deserve our remembrance, and their suffering demands that we remain vigilant against those who would exploit the vulnerable for personal gain.